Perfect. ARC is a coalition of dedicated people committed to eradicating racism and spreading anti-racism throughout our communities, our countries, and the world. Community in Action was formed to provide an opportunity for our members to grow together. We're eager to grow and learn from our past so that we can paint a different future. Today's event is titled Youth's Perspective on the Future. In our event tonight, Adnai Yanakacho will be leading a discussion about the younger generation's view on the present and the future of our society. She's going to discuss how racism has been hidden from youth by schools and by parents. I'm really excited to have Adnai present today. She is a whopping 13 years old, and she's an incoming freshman at Chaska High School in Minnesota. She is also incredibly serving as the co-chair of our Events and Resources Committee for ARC. I continue to be inspired by Adnai and am more hopeful for the future working side by side with her on this committee. Before I kick it off to Adnai, I want to point out that this session is being recorded and it will be posted to our website so that others who couldn't make it today have the opportunity to listen in and grow. I'll hand it over to Adnai, and I hope that everyone is prepared for a lively and engaging discussion. So go ahead, off to you, Adnai.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Blake, for that. As Blake explained, I'm here to explain my perspective, so I'll just jump right into my story. So I tell you, as a young Black girl, I didn't recognize my Blackness as something different until I was about in 4th grade. Now that's pretty late for a person of color, but my parents are first generation, so they immigrated here from Ethiopia. So the first thing they're gonna think of when they come here is not gonna be racism. In fact, that's probably the last thing on their list, and they probably never heard of such a thing till they came to America. In elementary school, I just didn't seem like the color of my skin really made a difference. I didn't think that it would affect my education, safety, or ability to make friends. In fact, I didn't even seem to notice the racist acts towards me. It's only now when I look back that I noticed I was totally blind to racism. It was not until the summer going into 5th grade when my family stood in front of the TV hearing the news of Philando Castile. As much of a gossip girl I was back then and a very talkative girl, I wanted to know everything that was happening so I could ask them what happened. I watched a horrifying video and I didn't understand any of it. So I went to my oldest sister and she explained it a little more to me. She told me that the police shot him in his car because he was reaching for his wallet and he informed the officer he had a firearm, but he still shot him. My family had a good conversation about this event, saying things like, make sure to obey all the officer's commands and all the ways to react when you see a police officer approach you. Obviously, I was like 10 years old at the time, so I was confused on why I had to like do so much work when the police officer is supposed to be the one protecting you. At one point, we were banned from using Nerf guns outside because a Black boy got shot by a police officer who mistook one as a real gun. So at this point, I started realizing that this thing called racism is going to affect not just the people that I see in the news or on the TV, but me, my brother, my sister, my father, my mother, my friends, my cousins, and the list goes on. Without these healthy conversations, it might have honestly been a while since I would understand what was really going on in the real world. After the event of Philando Castile, I noticed my Blackness and how it could affect me. Now, before I go on, I'm just curious who or when was your breakthrough in your generation? So mine was George Floyd. Even though Philando Castile was when I noticed my Blackness, George Floyd was the breaking point for me. That's when I said I didn't want to stand there anymore and listen. I wanted to make a change. That's exactly why I'm here. That's why I joined ARC. So I want to know who your breakthrough was or milestone in your generation that caused you to step towards becoming an anti-racist. You can raise your hand or answer in the chat.
I guess for me, my first knowledge that something was different was Martin Luther King, his assassination.
Thank you.
And I just aged myself a lot.
You
Right.
don't look it. I will say that, Lynn. You look fantastic.
Yeah. I just ate myself. There's some people that were saying I unmuted not to laugh, but to share some comments in the chat. So there's people who said George Floyd for me too, Trayvon Martin's murder, and Rodney King being beaten in LA. And another to adopt anti-racism, it was George Floyd's murder.
Yeah, I see a lot of different time zones. I definitely wasn't alive for like half of them, but I can definitely see that. Yeah, George Floyd, yeah, that was one for many people. So this is all great. I'll continue on to my story. Now that I look back, and even now, I see that racial slurs were normalized, like heavily normalized. In elementary school, we were taught the song Chinese, Japanese, Americanese, and then it goes, I don't know how it goes, but it was something similar to that. And we would pull our eyes back. Even teachers would do it along with us. People chanted this in playgrounds and class and taught it to other children, calling it some kind of like trend. And it was just now that I noticed how disturbing and overly wrong that is. And that's where we need to make a change. If I didn't decide to learn on my own, who would teach me? Who? And the number of people who don't know about these issues and what's racially inappropriate and what's not, the number is off the charts. I didn't know what the N-word was until I was in 5th grade. That's very late. But there was still, and there are still, so many people who would say the N-word thinking it is okay and not knowing the real meaning behind it. When I had a conversation with my parents and sister about how wrong it is to say it and the meaning behind it, I can now better defend myself when people would use this word. People who aren't supposed to use it continue to use it, especially in middle school. There was a rumor that a Black 6th grader would sell cards to his white friends as passes to say the N-word. And I've definitely seen this, my brother told me this, and I've definitely seen this in other schools too. And it's people like him that don't know the meaning of this word and how this word could actually be used to hurt his race, and his white friends who don't know that this could be used to hurt his own friend. It's the untaught and ignorant youth who continue to bring racial slurs and normalize it as just a word or a trend, and not something that could harm another individual, not something that is just a trend, is used to dehumanize their peers. It's the kids who will spread the information and create the minds and ideas and spread minds and ideals of the next generation. The only way to stop these racial slurs and ideas to spread in youth minds and across schools is through educating and informing the youth, rooting the anti-racist mindset in youth minds and allowing it to grow through their community. The only way to eradicate racism in the next generation is to prepare the youth of this generation by educating them. Yet the school won't do any good in educating students about racism. In fact, they aren't obligated to teach us real history. Much of what you learned in your history books about race is inaccurate or incomplete. Christopher Columbus did not discover America. He landed in present-day Bahamas, colonizing indigenous people and forcing them to work for him and Spain. In 6th grade US history, I didn't learn about Juneteenth or the Chinese Exclusion Act. We weren't taught how Blacks were enslaved, but rarely learned about the ways they had fought to escape freedom. We didn't learn about the resilience of Japanese Americans created during the US internment, or how the Native Americans actually resisted white colonization, or the resilience of Latinx people towards xenophobia and racial stressors. They tell us the history of the civil rights movement as if everything happened in the past and all is solved. But they don't show that the struggle is something that's continuing to happen on today and affecting the people of color and their classrooms. They tell us how the Declaration of Independence says that all men are created equal, but they don't tell us that this wasn't applied to people of color and women. In fact, Thomas Jefferson, a founding father, wrote this while owning 200 slaves. In 6th grade history, they taught my class that Ethiopia was colonized by Italy. So if you don't know, Ethiopia is one of the only countries in Africa that were never colonized. And I know because my parents are Ethiopian and they always tell me about their history. So me and my other friend that was of Ethiopian descent, we went to our history teacher and we asked him about this matter. And then he said, I don't know. The history book just told me to teach you this, so this is what I'm going to teach you. I think that was rigged. The school's history curriculum tells you to teach children fake history. That seems a little messed up to me. And at that point, I was just thinking, like, imagine how many other things could have been a lie. I would have to relearn this whole history to fit what was actually true. I know obviously when you go to more advanced courses, stuff are going to be more accurate, but they're definitely still incomplete. Even in books. I once had this conversation with my older sister and it made me feel kind of guilty. Be completely honest with yourself right now. If you read a book and you haven't got to the part where they explain their appearance, you automatically think the character is of what race? White, right? It's the truth. Not unless the character is described with some other type of skin color or background, the default color is white. And that's something that needs to be changed in the minds of children, so it doesn't grow on to be a habit for the next generation like it did to me and you. You can do this by teaching your children from a young age, or even now, to read books with people of color as the main characters. So now the real question is, who will educate the youth about racism seeped deep in the American system if teachers aren't taught to? If the school, the district doesn't want to change their curriculum anytime soon? Who? Well, that's easy. The people who raised you from when you were born. Your parents and your guardians have the responsibility to lead you to the right path. Whether it's ignoring racism, enforcing racism, or fighting against it, the power is in you, parents. You are the foundation to your children's knowledge. I found this passage written by Ruby Bridges when reading her book, This Is Your Time. And it's written so it's directed to kids. So it says, I have been saying for many years how I believe racism is a grown-up disease. And we adults must stop using you, our kids, to spread it. None of you is born into the world racist. It is we adults who pass racism on. In so many ways, we have failed you by not setting the example you deserve. I've always believed it is our role as grown-ups to guide, lead, and teach our children to set the best example, just as you must do when you grow up. Just as my parents and I had healthy conversations about how to deal with racism, you adults and parents had the responsibility to guide your children towards the right path. How about those who have already grown up and are in like high school or middle school? Unlike other generations, this generation is way more aware of social issues in the world. It's not because teenagers sit down and watch CNN and analyze every bit of it, but we get our source of information from these two words: social media. Yep, Instagram, TikTok, and all the other social media apps you could think distract your children could actually have a potential of spreading information about issues going on in the world. I first learned about that Trump supporter raid on TikTok, Dante Wright, Derek Chauvin's charges, and Ma'Khia Bryant from Instagram, and countless other things. People add posts on their Instagram stories, and the messages spread from there. Social media does the job of simplifying these social issues down for teenagers' developing minds to make it easier to understand. People on TikTok make videos explaining the truth behind news. And on social media, you can find content where people speak out about racial topics, explaining phrases that are racist to racial groups of all kinds, share news about racial incidents, and even make videos that share cultures of other countries. There are many Instagram accounts, for example, ARC, that give you daily information on any social issue or social aspect in history. And that's the best way to get this message out to youth. So as much as social media might seem like a bad thing, it could be a good way to get the message of racial equality out to people my age and older. So take time to listen to the youth of my generation, to provide them with a better path to build a mindset of racial integration. You adults are the key to unlocking a better future for the youth and the next generation, so they don't end up learning about racism late. If you have any questions for me representing the youth, feel free to ask. And thank you for listening. It means a lot that you guys are here to listen to my output. Thank you.
Woohoo! Adnai, I could listen to you talk all evening. Again, I just want to point out to everyone that she is 13, wrote all of that content herself, really got no support from the rest of the events and resources group. So I'll open it up to the group if anyone has questions for Adnai with her great perspective. And I really appreciate the stories that you shared, Adnai, as well.
Yep, thank you.
And I thought it was just fantastic. Again, I'm just very proud.
I don't have
very
any
proud.
questions, but I did want to say thank you so much for sharing that really important perspective. I think I work in marketing, and so I'm always thinking about like what is a relevant way to bring a conversation to your audience, to this Generation Z when it comes to like marketing our products. And I think it's so interesting because the way that our nation and our communities are taking on these really challenging issues of racial reconciliation. I'm seeing a lot that we can learn from Generation Z and how you guys are using different platforms and different ways to communicate to keep that message that unfortunately is generations and generations old, and this challenge that we're facing that is generations and generations old, fresh and approaching it with a new angle. So I think it's really exciting, but also just really important that you were able to share your story and kind of talk through the content today.
Yep, thank you.
Adnai, can you hear me?
Yep.
Fantastic job. As I put in the chat, so very proud of you and everything you're doing. And, you know, Adnai is, she's 13. She's the youngest person in ARC, but we have several other young people who are also doing some incredible things. A few of them are on. If they'd like to share, they certainly can. I'm not going to put them on the spot, but Adnai's a great representative of the young people that are teaching us. And Adnai, I loved how you shared the fact that your family, immigrated from Ethiopia, which most people, one of the things I like to share with people is, especially white people, but Black people too, African Americans that don't know African history, that don't know world history, the impact that Ethiopia had on the world's history, one of the oldest sovereign countries. So it's really good that you shared that perspective coming from Ethiopia. How have your parents adjusted to being here and raising young, children or young people like yourself and your sisters in this environment? How have they adjusted to that?
I definitely think so. They came here 14 years ago. So I definitely think it's probably the news that probably affected them. They've seen like different things like police brutality, like they always stand in like the Philando Castile event. They've seen that thing and they start noticing, okay, there's this thing called racism and I need to protect my children from it. And I need to have these conversations and tell them more about it. And obviously they learned that a little bit later and probably not when I was younger. But when we started growing up, they thought like, okay, this is when I need to start talking about them. And I think probably it's the news that probably affected them the most.
That's great. Thank you very much for sharing. Again, learn about Ethiopia. If you didn't know, the Queen of Sheba is from Ethiopia. So I would really challenge all of you, do some learning. The more you understand about African history and the richness that's been buried, the more you have in terms of ability to eradicate the myth of racism.
Yep, thank you.
Adnai, can I ask you a question?
Yep.
So I'm really curious about the kind of conversations that you have with your classmates.
Okay, so usually
because I think in our community, there's a lot of indifference. Please go ahead, yes.
Okay, so usually the problem is I'm like one of the only Black people in my classes. So usually the conversations don't start until I make them start because I'm on this thing called like the morning show. and I have choices. Sorry, my little brother's in the background. I have choices on what topics I want to speak on. So I usually speak on racial topics because, no one else is going to do it. And I feel like it just makes a bunch of them uncomfortable. I have this one friend that's like able to talk about, one white friend that's able to talk about with me, but these conversations like rarely happen in classes. Like the closest it gets is them watching my videos, trying to explain to them what I feel and what my perspective is. But yeah, these conversations rarely happen. Yeah. And if any, it's probably like talking about the recent events like Daunte Wright or George Floyd and how that affects me and how I feel about it too.
I have a question. So this is really putting Adonai on the spot, but because of everything that has happened this past, 15 months or so, and because of all of the awareness, do you think, this is just a do you think, your opinion, that your generation and then the generation that comes after you, do you see that things, just the perspectives might change more rapidly because of all of the social media and because of all of the awareness? Or do you think it's likely to still kind of have issues just like it's been with our generations and before us older folks?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've been asked that many times, and I want to say 100% yes, but I'm going to say 90 because this is why. I definitely see lots of people from my school like posting things on social media, talking about the issues like police brutality and how we need to make justice for them. But I don't really see the change happening. But definitely when I saw like George Floyd and all those protests and the protests breaking out in the cities, like that's when I realized I was like, maybe there is, like, I do have hope and maybe we can make a change. Because I also joined this discussion at my school. There was only a few people, but one of the leaders asked me and asked the kids, do you think there is going to be a change in the next generation? A lot of people said, yeah, we have hope. It's only if we continue to build up and build up this awareness that we can change tomorrow. Yep.
Ed and I have a question, because I know one of the things as parents we're learning is that, we need to start talking to our kids about it. And even at young ages, even as young as 6 months old, they're saying kids recognize race and that it's important to talk with your kids. Have you seen at the school level teachers and more like discussions in the classroom or events like school, what do they call those? Like where everybody gets in the auditorium and has a, I'm talking about, Blake?
Presentations.
Yeah, like
assembly. Yeah.
Assembly. Thank you. Have you noticed any movement within the school district of doing more of these things and being more open about these discussions? Or
yeah, so basically like I explained earlier, I'm on this thing called like the morning show. So it's like a show that everyone watches in the morning. So the librarian is really into like making sure that like this topic of race is presented to our school. So I work on that mostly, and my brother work on that. We make shows about maybe, let's say, like the Little Rock Nine, informing of them about different things like that and speaking about race. And last year they did a show on like it's not allowed to say the N-word and stuff like that. So that's where we've gone so far. We've never had like actual conversations in class about it and like open discussions about it. Maybe like they watch the show, but they don't talk about it or anything, or no one pays attention. So I don't really know their feedback on it. So I tried to make a change. I don't know if anyone's like actually participating in discussions and willing to make a change. So that's what's going on in my school so far. I don't know about others.
I can add some things because I'm Sarah, by the way. Sorry, I can't turn my camera on at the moment, but I'm a rising junior. I'm so used to calling myself a sophomore, sorry. But I go to Breck School in Golden Valley. And so just recently, we've been looking into student-led restorative practices like Circle. So they're just, it's really new for us. but that's one thing we're trying to implement in our school to get just really like highlight student voices, especially implementing them in these issues regarding race and racism in our school. Just having this like student initiative and student-led discussions with faculty. That's one of the things that BRAC has been doing, along with like students at BRAC really utilize social media. There's like several pages now, Black at BRAC and Women at BRAC, just sharing the experiences of BRAC students and the racism they've dealt with. And yeah, so that's I just wanted to offer that as a BRAC student coming from another school in the Minneapolis area.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Oh,
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely think, I feel like the high schoolers have more options than the middle schoolers to have those like discussion groups and things like that. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, Sarah, I'd love to hear a little bit more. Is that something that was led by students, or was that something that the school started and formed this? It seems like it's a small group setting.
Yeah, are you talking about like the social media pages or the restorative practice circles?
Yep, the circles. Yep.
Okay, yeah. This is like very new. Right now, currently we're undertaking summer training, actually, a group of students I'm in. We're just like honestly just learning about restorative practices and how we can implement that into the BRAC community. But yeah, these are just like some of the methods that we've been looking into. So it's really new, but we're hoping to implement it in the following years.
I don't have any kids, and I surely do not have any high school age students, but I'm just wondering, anyone else on the call, have you heard of, if you have children, or for me, it would be like nieces, nephews that have programs like that in their school? Because this was just surprising and in a good way for me to hear that exists.
I know in our school last year, immediately after the George Floyd incident, there were a lot of issues on campus. The N-word was being used. And so there was a group of students that were put together to try to, number one, to talk about it, because it's a subject that, most people don't talk about. So anyway, they talked about it and actually came up with a pledge that they presented to the principal, which basically said that, as students, we would respect each other, we would respect our differences. She actually had the group make changes in the pledge, some of the wording, and then didn't use it. Just didn't mention it anymore. And so I think for a lot of our students, I don't know if anybody saw the comment that Valerie made a few minutes ago. She said that she feels like kids her age, an issue like this is a trend, and then it'll go away and then something else will come up.
Yeah, I think Valerie must have been on her way somewhere. She said when she gets home, she'll try to speak a little bit to us. Valerie is, I think, also a rising junior in high school, very active in the high school, also very impressive. So is Sarah. But that is the danger with social media. That would be interesting, Adonai, if you could tell us your perspective on that, because it does feel like, I know as I've tried to engage in social media, that I missed the trend. It's like something's hot and I try to respond and it's all over. So how do you, in your age group, keep the attention of these young people? Because this is 500 years. At least we've been dealing with racism as defined today. So it's going to take a concerted effort. It's not going to be like one summer of marches and it's going to go away. It's going to take concerted effort, like what we're trying to do. How do you think, what could we do to try to get that sustained attention?
I definitely just think like, keep talking about it, because yeah, these things like George Floyd, for some people, it was a trend. It was just like, oh, justice for George Floyd. And then a week later, we don't talk about it. just continuing to bring up those conversations and keep bringing them up all year long can make them feel like, okay, this thing is not just a one-day thing, it's a all year long and forever thing. So just continuing to bring those topics up.
And I think not being comfortable, because I think sometimes we get comfortable, when things are going okay. And yet every day I wake up, and I was telling my boss this the other day, every day when I wake up and leave my house, I know that I'm Black, and I know that there are issues that come with that. And so making our kids realize, okay, because you think that everything's going okay right now, it can change like that because you're still the same.
Can I also add that, so everything after pandemic life will just kind of go back, and people's minds will be more likely to just go back to whatever. But the other aspect of all this that I noticed is, so I felt like as a Black person, there was a huge upheaval and just a lot of things directed. But then there's the situation where people of Asian ethnicity were targeted terribly. And there've been years of people who were Middle Eastern who were targeted. And when I say targeted, as far as with racial slurs, with actual violence, with systemic problems. And I just want, in my mind, I just wish that all of the different races could just understand the beauty of differences and the beauty of human dignity. And like Adonai said, not dehumanizing any others. And it's just, I don't want anyone to be next, but it seems like, because I felt like when things with COVID got bad with people in India, I'm thinking in my mind, Indian people in this country are next to get some kind of COVID slur pushed towards them. It is just, and again, I feel like this is the older people. I still have hope. I'm going to especially ride off of Adonai and say I have hope for younger people to not continue this on for decades. But I just want all different people to have compassion for other races and respect too.
Thanks for sharing that, Lainey. That was really powerful. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us.
Adonai, I'm curious if the school is getting any pushback to your morning shows and the things that you're saying, because I hear so many people complaining about they don't want this stuff taught. Excuse me.
Yeah, there actually was, like, my librarian wanted me to do a Black Lives Matter video, but then the principal was like, oh, I'm getting a lot of complaints from like parents saying like, oh no, we don't want this to be shown to our children and stuff like that. That's like a political opinion or something like that. So then I couldn't do that show this year, which is very disappointing, but I tried to do as other shows. But and there were also a lot of 6th grade parents complaining about how in US history they were learning like about like the civil rights movement, and apparently complaining that that was not right to be taught to their children. And I just think that's crazy. So there's been a lot of pushback.
John has his hand up.
There we go. I was just going to mention that I think Adonai is a great resource, especially for her white friends who don't think about race whatsoever, because they're so insulated. In our little suburban community where it's just so uniform. I'm fortunate that I have my daughter with me here now and my son, and I struggle trying to have these conversations with them because, well, I'm their dad. I mean, they don't want to have me lecturing them. And so I get back to the first point I made is that I think, Adonai, you are a really important resource source for a lot of children your age so that they can become less ignorant. So I want to thank you for that.
Yes, thank you.
Hey, Edna, this is Tommy. So I never went through the education system in the United States. So all what I learned is through my daughter. I'm just very curious, so For young kids, typically, let's say start from kindergarten, go to primary school, they tend to be very, I would say, pure, innocent. When do you think, this kind of racism start to kind of develop in school? Is mainly coming from the exposure to the society, or coming from classmates, or coming from family? What's your experience? I'm just curious.
For me, unlike most like people of color, they usually like get like a racial slur towards them and are confused like why. But for me, it was mostly like the news that I heard from like I told like Philando Castile. I was confused and I kept asking my sister a bunch of questions like, why was this person shot because he was Black? I didn't understand that because of the skin color who was shot. And then after a while, when my parents kept having these conversations with me saying like, oh, you can't walk outside with a Nerf gun because last week a Black boy got shot because he thought the Nerf gun was the real gun. So then that's when I started noticing, yeah, this thing is going to start to affect me. My skin color is going to start to affect me. So I feel like that's when I started noticing, oh, this Blackness, my skin color is going to start affecting how I live. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Tommy, I was also going to mention too, so the board is going through the racial healing handbook. And one of the things that that handbook does is make you go back and think about the past. And one of the things where racism can develop is even like teachers. Like one of my earliest memories that I actually had forgotten about was a teacher who we had one Black girl in my class of all white kids. And I remember a distinct memory of the teacher treating her differently because of the way she was speaking. And she kept like, I don't want to say harassing, but she kept correcting her every time she used this. Like it was just African, what is it called? Like African American vernacular. Like it was just like a colloquialism that her family used, but the teacher kept correcting her over and over again. And I remember the classmates sort of laughing about it. And so I think there's also like teachers who maybe they realize they're being racist, or maybe they don't even realize it. So it's even at a young age, and this was like second, third grade that I recall this. So I think even teachers at a young age can start. And maybe these students don't recognize it as racism at that age, but I'm sure years later on that they think back and realize that this was, something that was racist at the time. And so, that's where we need more diversity in our teachers too, throughout the whole school districts.
Yes. Great insight. Thanks, Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
I also think a lot of people will say that and I'm not sure generationally how much this is, I guess I can only speak for my age group, but we'll say lots of times that they had people that they wanted to be friends with, and sometimes they knew that their parents were going to disapprove of that friendship with that person from whichever other race. And when came time for dating, that would be a problem as well. I think our television, I see it now even in commercials. I don't know if you all have noticed in television commercials, you will see a couple and you will many times find that the lady might be a Black lady and there may be a white man or an Asian man. And it's just showing the possibilities of what couples can look like. And I had never seen, I bet you all, if you think too, had never seen of, or maybe even thought that was going to ever show up. And I think the media is very important too. I mean, there's definitely teachers, there's definitely your parents and other kids, but the media really can make your brain, whether it's conscious or subconscious, see things a lot differently. And I think it's important to have diverse shows on TV and diverse relationship dynamics on TV, because it could be life could imitate art instead of art imitating life. So I find that hopeful too, but I definitely had situations as a kid where it's like, oh, you're not going to be allowed to come to my house because my mom and dad aren't going to let a Black person come over. It's like, okay, I'll just see you at school. It's just, but I hope that's not still happening so much now, but I don't know.
Well, it may not be, because schools are more segregated today than they were before Brown versus the Board of Education. So there's just not that many, kids of color that are going to school in an intermixed situation like Colin described. There's some, but not a lot. I will take credit. General Mills, who many of us have worked for on this call, actually made the first commercial it was about 10 years ago, that showed an interracial couple on a Cheerios commercial. We got a lot of pushback about that. And I remember this guy named Ian Friendly. I'll give him all the credit in the world. I remember the meeting, they called a big meeting. And we were getting a tremendous amount of hate on social media about that. And Ian said, we're not taking it down. And he stuck with it. Our sales went up. And ever since then, you started seeing all these other companies start having more interracial folks. Till now, I bet you half of the commercials have interracial couples. Almost, it seems that way to me. But Adnan, I did have another question for you. One of the things we're trying to do with ARC is trying to drive change through personal transformation. So once we understand what anti-racism is about, challenging our friends and influencing them to change, that's where I'm spending a lot of my personal time. How are you going about that with your friends? And in some cases, maybe even teachers or administrators you're coming in contact with, because I've known you now for 6 months. You are very influential. You're obviously someone who can influence people. So how are you using that, and what hurdles are you seeing that are more difficult to deal with? Because it certainly seems like you're not afraid to take on tough conversations. But how is that going as you're trying to influence people, not only to be open-minded, but to become anti-racist, to be outspoken, to be a true ally who does something to change this situation?
So for me, I usually, like I said, I do the morning show. So it's like a show where everyone watches in class. So I try to express my message through there. And I also did this thing called History Day. And then I did a project, it was on Martin Luther King and the FBI. So then I also showed that to the whole school too. So they learned a lot of information from that about Martin Luther King and how he was actually spied on during his work. So I try to, I work with the librarian, the principal and the assistant principal to make sure my message of racial equality is shown to this world, shown to the school. And I feel like if I didn't decide to step up and do it, nobody else would. So I feel like it's only me doing it, I guess. But I feel like I hope I meet more people in high school. I feel like for the conversations and parts like that, I try to strike up conversations with my white friends, but I usually see that let's say it's two white people and one black person, and I start the conversation about, let's say Daunte Wright, who got killed. I eventually end up talking to the black person, and then the white person's trying to distract themselves, looking somewhere else, or trying to change the subject or something like that. So it is really hard to strike up the conversation, because eventually they'll try to change the subject. But I hope that changes. Yeah, and I was definitely thinking that I don't have the power to I can't force a white person to talk about it with me. So I feel like that's where the parents' jobs come in, where they have to try to tell their white friends you should have these conversations with your with the friend that's a person of color. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. You're doing a tremendous amount of work that certainly I was not doing at 13. Yeah, I guarantee you that right now. And racism existed. I was not working on it. I can tell you that. I certainly was not. I'm trying to, at 52, keep up with you and what you're doing. And I hope that you're inspiring all of us that are mostly on this call that are older than you, some by a little, some by a lot, that we can do more, because you're really incredible, the stuff that you're doing.
Yep, thank you.
And I know that a part of this call, we wanted to talk through some of the actions that we could all take to help, because listening to Adnai is extremely inspiring, and we want to make sure that we transition that inspiration into action so that we can not have people like Adnai in 50 years saying, I feel like I'm doing it all by myself. That's so disheartening to hear, Adnai. And everyone on this call has been really inspired by you to take action. So let's transition this last 10 minutes to talk through different ideas or suggestions to make a change.
This is Colin. One thing, well, I would have to agree with Denzel. I am shocked about how much of an impact you're making at 13. I just couldn't help not to say that. It's extremely impressive. But something that you did, asking your sister, looking into the news, questioning things, that is what I've learned has had a good impact into inspiring change, is building awareness or challenging people to look at the facts, to really look into the history. Just thinking back at the podcast that Tommy, you and Donzel did, some of the stories that Donzel told at the beginning of the podcast, I had no idea about those incidents. I never learned about them in school. I never went out of the way to learn about some of these things. And if I didn't listen to that, I never would have gone and explored some of those situations further. But since then, I have been exposing those types of stories, those types of horrors, and some of this real dark past that we've had to try to expose that, so for others to actually understand where we are, where we were, and where we want to go, and why these perspectives, why these frustrations, why this cloud of darkness exists, and why there's a united front who wants to bring light kind of to the world and not have this Democratic Republican debate or hate debate or racist debate or whatever weird excuse somebody turns away from avoiding a conversation that makes you uncomfortable. So for you to do that at 13 again inspires me, and I'm learning from you today, and I'm going to try to take what you've done and put that into my own life.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. This is Fred. So one of the things that I was thinking about, Adonai, about when you're talking about, hey, when you're talking about this with your friends and there's white and black, the white people, you want to change the subject. And what I find interesting about that is they want to change the subject because they're uncomfortable, right? And so one of the things that, you know, I have 7 nieces and nephews. My wife and I don't have children, but one of the things that I think I can do with ARC and then with this podcast or with this conversation is share that with my nieces and nephews, because sometimes it's difficult with them growing up in, you know, a very conservative suburbs of Detroit. Sometimes it's tough for them to understand what's, you know, a lot of these subjects because their parents aren't having the same conversations with them. So that's one of the things that I'll do is I'm going to share this with my nieces and nephews and make sure that they hear this conversation and hear a different perspective than that they would normally hear of. So thank you for sharing your experiences with me, and then now with my 7 nieces and nephews. And then one other thing I'll just say before I go back on mute is I was lucky enough 2 years ago to go to Ethiopia with my wife, and my wife and I spent a week there. And just echoing Donzel's comments earlier about just the history behind that country, and you know, just the people and the, you know, how religious of the country it is, and it was a fascinating country to visit. So I was lucky enough to do that. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. That was awesome that you visited Ethiopia.
And I was just going to add real quick before Erica, sorry, I saw Erica was just unmuting. I just want to say, even if like Ed and I, when you're having these conversations, either in person or on social media, and it seems like people are ignoring you, there could also be people listening that aren't visually there. Like, so for example, on Twitter, I might not respond to everything, but I see conversations and I learn so much just from seeing how other people respond. So even though it may seem like you're talking and those people are ignoring you, there's still, some people could still be listening and gaining something. So it's always good for all of us to speak up, because even if the person you're talking to is rejecting it, there might be somebody in that circle who's actually listening and getting something out of your perspective. So
Yep.
yeah,
That's
so
very
thanks for speaking up.
Yeah, I definitely got a lot of feedback on it. So I see that people are listening. Yep.
You know, this is Eric. I was just going to build, you know, on John's comment here in the chat, and someone mentioned earlier how, whether it's real or perceived, how difficult it is to change curriculum in schools. You know, there's a lot of politics and state funding and federal funding and textbooks and money that goes into making those choices. But I think that's something we've really got to learn more about and fight. Fight for the inclusion of this type of content in curriculum. There's a lot in the news this week on the use of critical race theory as part of education process and whether that does or doesn't belong in schools. So I think that's a very important battle to fight and find ways to break through and include that. I think in today's day and age, whether it's like the morning show you mentioned, Ad and I, or clubs, and hopefully eventually curriculum, structured curriculum, there's ways to do this with virtual tools and you don't have to wait for the next chapter of the textbook to be published. We can get after this faster. So I'm really inspired to do more there. And then I also just wanted to quickly mention, I'll throw this in the chat too. There's a new National Public Radio podcast out for parents who are having challenges trying to figure out how to raise anti-racist children. It's called Early Risers. So it's relatively new, fresh content out there. It's on National Public Radio. So if you've got younger children at home, that might be a useful tool to check out as well.
Can I add some? I'm sorry.
I'll make this quick. I just want to, on the other side of things, expanding off of what Erica said, I go to Breck, so we're a pretty independent school. So curriculum is really student-led. So this year we did include critical race theory in our curriculum, and I just wanted to share like the impacts of this. So we had this whole unit on critical theory, and it like truly was really impactful, and just like delving into the literature that we've been reading, and and using the critical race theory and like other theory like feminist theory and things like that. I just like the impact is really profound. And then as well as along with this, for Breck, like we have books for each grade, and then students are really involved in like the choosing of literature. As like this year, there were some issues that arose with like one of the books we chose, which is American Born Chinese. And like a bunch of Asian students felt that the issues were kind of glazed over. So a group of students, Asian students, were heavily involved in choosing new curriculum and new books for next year's curriculum for incoming freshmen and sophomores. So yeah, I just wanted to share my experience on the other side of things, where these like involvement of students and these new ideas in school have been implemented, and just like the impact they've had on me and students and my peers.
I don't know. I'm basically taking away, if my kid was in Minneapolis, I'm sending them to Breck, because they have a circle. That's awesome, Sarah. Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
Monet?
I was just gonna add kind of to what Sarah said and what Fred said. As far as it's kind of a combination. I just hope that anyone who's looking for the ability to take actions, if they can balance, I'm so sorry about the feedback in my background, but if they can have a balance between making sure that we know that we're educated about the negative things that have happened, but also making sure that we're educated and that we're educating our children about the positive things that these other cultures have added. Because when Fred said the part about he went to Ethiopia and he learned so much about the culture and religion, I just challenge everybody to look at lots of different cultures and see the good things. Like sometimes it feels like, as a Black person, Blacks were just slaves, and then one day we weren't slaves. And there's like a whole lot, or even with civil rights, slavery, then civil rights, then we just here. There's so much beauty and diversity there, and with Asian American people, with Ethiopian people, with Latin people. It's just, well, like, what about this too? What if sometimes you have, instead of the default going to the white race aspect, we talked about that earlier, books, what if you get your children, if you have little kids, doll babies of different colors and races and and just things that you just maybe never thought of, but it does make a difference in changing the generation. I'm gonna mute because my house is loud. I'm sorry.
I'm gonna add on to, I think Adna, you talked about representation mattering. Lene, you just talked about that too. I've written 2 children's books, and the characters are based off my niece and nephew. So they are Black, and my publishing company pushed back and wanted the kids to be white. And then when I said, no, I want them to be Black, I said, well, what about 1 Black, 1 white? So it's something that I had to really push for when I just wanted the characters to look like people from my family. And it was, the books are very nerdy. I'm a chemical engineer, so it's about the periodic table, not important. But I really wanted to have books that had Black kids doing something that was related to education, because I felt like there was a gap. And I cannot tell you, actually, someone who works at General Mills, one of my coworkers, when he saw my book, he said, Blake, when my second book came out, when are you gonna start writing books with white kids in them? Was the comment. And I felt like every book has so many white characters in it, so that you really need to be, I would challenge everyone to be really conscious of your decisions and your purchasing power when you're buying gifts, because it matters, and it's so impactful. I volunteered Big Brother Big Sister. My little is 11 now. She probably 3 months ago we were talking, and she's a young Black girl. She commented that she didn't want to be out in the sun because she didn't want to get darker, and basically just said all these negative things. And she said, when I was born, I was lighter skinned and I got darker, so I need to stay out of the sun. Like there are so many implications that we need everyone, Black kids, Hispanic kids, white kids, to see that all of these colors are beautiful, they're all normal, and that it's not that white is right. And I think we all have so many opportunities to consciously think about that and put those products in the hands of individuals that we're connecting with, young and old.
Well, just a quick public service announcement. I did put something in the chat. If you're looking for things you can do, I put 3 ideas there. 1, Tommy inspired someone else based on his performance on the podcast. He was so inspiring. Someone said, you know what? I can do that. Someone who's never done anything like that before. This guy named Dan Mouse, he contacted me, said, Donzel, if Tommy can do that, if he's got the courage to share his story, I will. So Dan's going to record. We're going to have his interview Friday, and we're going to publish a new episode on Saturday with Dan. The other thing I put in there is our own Adonai is also going to be hosting a talk show called the ARC Deep Dive. Carlos is on, he's the producer. Jeremiah, who helped put this together, is also co-producer and director. They're working feverishly. That should be launching in the next couple of months. I'm sure at some point she'll have guests. You can be a guest there and tell your story. Again, these are 2 ways that you can be public, share your story, and inspire people. And then third, we're going to be kicking off a major fundraising event here in July to put together the resources to professionalize and build our overall program for transforming people to be anti-racist. We believe that there's a lot of organizations working on changing laws. We need them. Black Lives Matter, NAACP, all the groups you want to name, but very few that are working on changing people's hearts. And for racism to go away by Adonai's generation or after, like Lainey said, we got to change people. We got to transform people to push racism to the fringes and eliminate it. We need your help to build and professionalize that system that we're pulling together. So thank you for just a couple minute PSA.
Awesome. Well, I know we're a little bit over on time. I just want to thank Adonai. It's incredible being on a team with you, Adonai. I do feel like Sarah, if you want to join our team, it's a pretty fun group. We love our younger members. Joking, not joking, but really appreciate everyone's time together. Adonai taking the time to share your story, and really educate all of us so that we can be better and just really take the time to be inspired by you and what action that we want to take There's going to be some additional resources on our website. We post those monthly for different resources. They're going to be catered more towards how you can support and take action with the youth this month. And then we'll have another event coming up soon.
Yes, I believe it's in August is the next one.
Yep, August 10th. I just pulled it up. August 10th, we'll be talking about affirmative action in the workforce and changing the rules when it's convenient. So I'll be leading that discussion. Thank you everyone for your time. Again, round of applause for Adonai.
Yep, thank you all for coming and listening to me.
Have a good one.
Wonderful.